Hello, viewers. Welcome back to your weekly State of Affairs program here on QTV. It is your flagship political program brought to you by QTV every week. I'm your host, Aliu Sise. And this week we are back after a long break due to the Ramadan and other political engagements. But we are back to bring you the weekly State of Affairs program. And as you have been following developments in the country, we have seen on 9 April, Gambians went to the polls to vote in a parliamentary election that is done and dusted. And just last week, we saw the President of the Republic, His Excellency President Adama Barrow, reshuffled his cabinet and appointed a new one that has already been sworn in at an event presided over by the President at the State House in Banjul. And joining me this week to discuss this and other issues, I have Dabakh Malik, a social commentator and a concerned citizen who is here in the studio. Dabakh, good to have you on the program.
Thank you very much, Aliu, and always a pleasure to be here. And I think this is my first time coming.
Indeed, and it's always a pleasure to have you, Dabakh Malik. I also have nobody but Mr. Mboch, QTV's host of The Popular Viewpoint. Mr. Mboch, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you.
Of course, this is not my first time of co-hosting with you.
Indeed, I don't see this, but he's will be joining us hopefully by next week. But like I said, I mean, let me now start with Daba. Daba, I know you were away from the country. You were in the United States and came back just last week, but you've been following developments back home. I mean, we've seen a new parliament has been elected and now into work, and then the president has also sworn in his new cabinet. First and foremost, what's your take on these developments?
Yeah, I think like many Gambians, or let me say like every Gambian, you know, we came from somewhere, and in 2016, something that a lot of Gambians thought would never happen. And, you know, the coalition government had a mandate to govern this country for 5 years. And after that, we went through a presidential election to re-elect people that we thought will entrust the affairs of this country. And in that election, we had different candidates. So Barrow won and his coalition. So it was just a continuation of the same process that was started through the presidential election. So the National Assembly elections also was the same because parliamentarians were given a 5 years mandate and their mandate elapsed. So we had to go into an election. Some were re-elected, some were not. So upon the constitution also states that when the president is elected and sworn in, he needs to appoint a new cabinet. It's either he has to dissolve the cabinet, so he can reappoint the people who were there, or he can appoint new people into cabinet. So what we have seen is he has retained few, but to a larger extent, the greater number of people who were in cabinet were normal. But in the parliamentary elections also, we have seen some MPs who decided not to rerun for election. We have seen also MPs who were incumbent and they ran for election and lost, and we have seen new people. So by and large, what is more important is, you know, government is a setup of three arms of government, and, you know, the media is the fourth estate, has claimed by many. But these people, the three estates are some are elected, some are appointed, but what is more important is we need a completion of this to be able to operate as a government. And let's hope for the best that, you know, the energy and the enthusiasm that Gambians have taken to go out there and vote, people who have voted into office will act in a way that, at least, I'm not saying 100% because it will be difficult, but at least Gambians will see to a greater extent the change, and their aspirations will be on track for the Gambia that we all dream about.
I mean, you talk about the three arms of the government. You have the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. From your understanding, I mean, how important is the legislature?
Oh, very much important. And, you know, I know, like, to a greater extent, a lot of people underestimate the importance and the value of the legislature. You know, I think a lot of Gambians, even some parliamentarians, will focus more on the lawmaking aspect, but the oversight functions of the National Assembly, to me, is more paramount than the legislative aspect, because Parliament is the people who vote in and approve the budget that the executives use to implement their projects. And to me, to a greater extent, some may disagree with me, but I think it's about time also Parliament comes with laws that will change the way our national budget is presented at Parliament. Because for me, I think, you know, we've been doing something for the past 54 or 55, 56 years, but in terms of accountability and transparency, I think there is a lot more that we can do. And to make it easy, parliamentarians need to understand the powers that they have. You know, But it's sad, like the Gambian parliamentarians to a greater extent focuses more on partisan politics within parliament. You know, I am opposed to the government. Whatever comes to parliament, I have to vote no. I am in support of government. You know, whatever comes in parliament, I have to vote yes. But parliament shouldn't operate like that. And parliament is key sector which is very much important in the administration of this country that we call the Gambia, just like the executive, just like the judiciary. So they need to understand their independence and their powers and what they need to do to hold the executive accountable for not only the funds that they are given, that is the budget, but also the governance aspect and the policies that they put in running the affairs of this country. So in terms of talking the importance of parliament, I'll just give it the same importance and relevance that we give to the executive and the judiciary, because they all should be equal, and because they are both independent has claim, even though we know sometimes the kind of politics that plays around everything that governs us, but they are very much important.
I mean, this was confirmed by the participation of political parties in the last parliamentary election. We saw, for example, UDP putting up over 40 candidates, aspiring candidates at the time, NPP 40, I mean, the NRP and other parties. And at the end, we saw NPP got only 18 of the 53 seats, I mean, UDP 15. What does this tell as far as government politics is concerned, and looking at the composition of the current legislature? What does this tell?
No, what it tells is like Gambians are at liberty to choose whoever they want to, different from what used to happen during Jammeh's time. You know, a lot of people would say Jammeh is stealing the election. Some people would say people voted for Jammeh because of out of fear. You know, some say, you know, he was using state machinery and the civil servants and, you know, the local administrators to win votes and all that stuff. But to a greater extent, people said he was either stealing or there was that fear factor. You know, even though that is debatable, we can debate about that. But what is happening currently is to show where we have come, where we came from in 2016 and how far we have gone in terms of our democratization process and the free will of people to choose whoever they think will better represent them. Because for me, that is the most important thing. So in terms of what happened, to a greater extent, Gambia is evolving as a democratic country. Gambia is evolving as a nation that people are free and at liberty to choose whoever they want to represent. But now it becomes the responsibility of those people who are elected in office to understand what their core mandates are, and they focus more on that and then limit. I know politicians, wherever they gather, you cannot take away politics, but we have to put away politics for some time and focus on the dire issues that the country needs to be addressed right now. And that cannot happen if all of us did not put our hands together to work as a country, as a citizen, because the better of Gambia is the betterment of all. But if it goes the other way around, we can point fingers and hold people accountable, but to a greater extent, it's us, the citizens, who will bear the brunt of the pain, the high cost of living, and the insecurity and everything. So to a greater extent, I think we are evolving. With time, we'll grow as a country.
Let me bring in Mr. Mbodj here. I mean, he's wearing two caps, a co-host and a contributor, actually. I mean, Mr. Mbodj, you're apart from Daba. I mean, talking about the legislature, I mean, certainly we know they have these free mandates, I mean, legislating, I mean, representation and oversight. I mean, you've been following developments from the campaign. We know we hosted several debates here of the candidates, and the eventual winners were sworn in. I mean, do you think, I mean, this current legislature has what it takes to be able to perform these functions?
Let me put it this way. Let me just sort of start from Dabak's sort of perspective. It's important to have this perspective from 2016, what's been going on, the transformation, the changes that we've been trying to make until now. And it seems to me that with this legislative elections, and then with the announcement of the new cabinet and the swearing in, it's an important change. It's a turnaround. We've made a shift, as it were. Even the president acknowledged in his speech that this is a new phase in the country's political transition. Technically, it was really the coalition that was in power, if you know what I mean. Government voted in coalition. The people voted in the coalition, really, in 2016. And then in 2017, the coalition was in power. But then UDP was very powerful within the coalition. So that was reflected in the results and all of that. So now, it is about President Barrow, no longer about the coalition, but about NPP. Yes, we've all talked about, especially during the debates.
Yeah.
Remember the National Assembly debates? We were all looking at the caliber of contestants, and I remember from many quarters they were not impressed at all and stuff like that. But for me, I rather focused on the process. Process is one thing, were things fair, that sort of thing, and outcomes or the contents of process quite another. That depends on what kind of a society you are. Really. So I just focused on that. The rest, as Ade Darame loves saying, we are having to relearn democracy. Let's be honest with ourselves. And then with the change, you had this explosion of interest in politics. So everybody was just going in. But again, democracy never promised you the right choice. It merely promised you participation. So we can complain all we want. But for me, as long as the processes were correct, we are going to have to relearn so many different things. We will be disappointed with all sorts of things. But this is what it means to be in a political transition.
You talk about relearning. Where do we start?
Ooh, every individual, really. we tend to put sort of the burden on government, and we have a sort of like a scapegoat, as it were, always government. But you realize that we are government. The people who form the government, they came from us. In all likelihood, the institutions all the time, they reflect the nature of the people. So it's high time we retake that responsibility. If there's going to be any reform, any radical change in our society, it has to go back to the people.
I mean, talking about radical, I mean, it has to come back to the people. Dawa, now, I want to engage you here. I mean, what do you think should be the first, the short-term priority of the new legislature, the sixth legislature?
Reforms. Because for me, for us to get to where we want to, we need to have a master plan. And, the sad thing is, like I said, most of our budgets, most of our development plans tend to focus more on a short-term plan. And development as an individual is a long-term plan, talk less of a country where you have over 2 million people. And the sad thing about Africa is a lot of the politicians focus on election yearing. And that's why most of our development goals are short-term development plan. And the reality is, we don't have the resources that are necessary to cater for all these developments that we want to do in a short period of time. So what we end up doing is to go outside and borrow. Either our internal borrowing will go high, or our outside borrowing to multinational and international organizations like the IMF, World Bank, and the Arab Development Fund is always going up. And as a country, if you borrow more than what you produce, you find it difficult to repay back those loans. And some of these loans comes with, high interest rates and all that stuff. And that's why, I am young, but I don't think in my lifetime I have ever had Gambia read a budget that was budget surplus. All what we've been having is budget deficit. We always have budget gaps. Like what we aspire to do and the revenues that we have is always, there's a huge gap. And most of the time, the reason why even that gap is fulfilled, is filled, comes from donors. And, we are living in a global fatigue for donors, and also looking at the global economy, the way it is going with the COVID pandemic, the war in Russia and Ukraine. A lot of trends are changing. So before I help you, I have to help myself first. So for me, reforms, we need to have the laws, because if I give you the responsibility to be a minister, you need to have a clear terms of reference that will dictate and evaluate your performances. But it's sad that here we appoint people in places, but there is no evaluation of what they do, whether we have to leave them to continue or we need to take them out. So for me, reforms are very much important. And number one is the Constitution. Number two is the Civil Service Act. Number three is the General Order, and a whole lot of things. And even look at our setup of ministers. Do we need all these kinds of ministers? What are the important ministries that we need? How many number of ministers that we need? All these parastatals that government have, are they all viable? Are they all costing more to government than they are giving even though government is pumping their millions and millions of dollars, are they giving the people the services that they need? These are all things that we need to look at. So for me, in general, what we need is reform. The security sector reform needs to go on, because when you evolve from a dictatorship, sometimes it's not like the security personnel want to behave in that way, but when you keep doing something for so long, it becomes part of you. So sometimes it might not necessarily really you want to do it, but you do it even unconsciously. So they need to go back and they need to be retrained. They need to know the laws. They need to know where their right stops. They need to know the rights of the people. They need to understand what the international treaties with regards to the respect and rights of individuals as citizens, as civilians. But civilians also, the reform also should not only stop at people who are entrusted to govern, but even us, the citizens. Because in Gambia now, when you talk to people, what they say, we have a democracy. But democracy does not give you the right to insult people. Democracy does not give you the right to infringe on the rights of other people. So in general, as a country, we need to diagnose what our problems are, and we come up with short-term plans, medium-term plan, and the long-term plan to be able to diagnose and come up with a solutions that are tangible, durable, but also time-bound and achievable. So then I think reform for me is the most important thing that we need.
Mr. Mboj, do you agree?
Yeah, very, very, very interesting there. And what he said, of course, that's what all of us will want, obviously. But earlier on, when he talked about development and the fact that we rely so much on donors and debt, taking loans, and you have to pay them and all the rest of it, absolutely granted. But you see, this is the key. You see, the whole idea of the reform is so that you will have the structure that would enable you for development, isn't it? But development, I will need investment, isn't it? So how do you balance that? How can I get the investment I need for the development we were talking about, isn't it? You have to invest, you're going to have policies, and then you have your objectives, the action plan, and all the rest of it. Does it make sense? How does one element, as it were, one aspect connect to the other? Is it integrated? So even Barrow today said that truly our institutions, our national institutions, they are really in need of good leadership. He himself, he acknowledged. And to my mind, the reason why he chopped, as it were, he truncated about half of the previous cabinet, it's really a message saying, hey, look, if you just can't do the job, move somebody else. There appears to be a certain commitment to certain things. But again, I must look at structurally what is going on, what's wrong, how do we fix it? Because I may start on the surface and say that the legislature, this is how it should be, our executive, all of these things, this is how they should be, the ideal, we all know the direction. But again, what is it on the ground? Because we've been talking about this for more than 50-something years since independence, as you mentioned. What is it on the ground that is working against ourselves? What is the dysfunctional element? Otherwise, every time, remember the last National Assembly elections, what people thought, and afterwards, how would you evaluate it? You know what I mean? So now we've got another one. What are the underlying conditions that if we do not attack, maybe it will make it very difficult for us to get the outcomes that we want? What do you suspect?
For me, I think it has more to do with our attitude.
Okay, beyond the laws, attitudes also.
No, attitude has Gambians, because we have to be honest with ourselves. If we want to build this country, we need to have a frank, open discussion. We may toe some lines, we may lose some friends, we may lose even some family members. But if it is to a greater extent for the betterment of this country, it worth it. Because you go to every Gambian, people, and social media could be a barometer that we can use to gauge the perspective of Gambians. And I can tell you, to a greater extent, some ministers did not come back, or they did not occupy the functions that they were occupying in the previous cabinet, is because of the perception that people have on social media. And to a greater extent, it filtered down to the ordinary Gambian. And that is what some of these ministers were corrupt, right? But like I always say, from 1965 to date, how many ministers have served in Gambia? How many managing directors have served? How many permanent secretaries? How many presidents? How many NGOs are operating in Gambia? Those directors of those NGOs, how many civil society, all these things. So, but when it comes to corruption, everybody talks about it, but nobody wants to attack the issue itself, because the people who are corrupt are our family members. They could be our parents, they could be our uncles, they could be our aunties, they could be our friends, our next door neighbors. But like I said, the attitude, the reason why in Gambia we celebrate thieves, we celebrate corrupt people more than hardworking people. Even if you work in the civil service for 40 years and after retirement you don't even have a house, what do they say? Mom sayud ndey. Mom liggéey na ñaar ñeneen fukki at kër sa amut ko. But somebody goes into the civil service in 2 years' time, he's driving Range Rovers, he's building houses, he's marrying wives, his kids are going to universities. ñu ne sa booti ndey la. But kenn yaayam juru ko pour mu nekk sàccakat, because corruption is sàcca. There is no difference between the person in court and stealing. He's even more to danger to society than boy bu nekk black market di sàcca mobile. Wala boy bu nekk si koñ bi di tu maybe benn joint. But you go to our prisons, ñan ñoo fa fees, these youths, you cut them with one joint, you take them to jail. But there are people in court who are stealing millions, but they work free.
Nothing happens.
So for me, it's the attitude of Gambians to see the resources that you are given. It's not like you are better than every Gambian, whether from the president coming down, but it's the opportunity and the privilege that you have to be at that position. So whatever you are entrusted with belongs to Gambians. So in managing public funds, number one, the most key and important things after qualification and everything, people will talk about qualification and whatever. But for me, honesty is the most important thing, because if you have 3 PhDs and you are not honest, there is nothing that you will deliver. You understand? So for me, attitudinal change the way we see public assets, the attitudinal change the way we see what belongs to the public. Even on the road, people will throw things, you talk to them, it's not yours. But in other countries, you are not even there crazy to throw something on the street. Or somebody will go and stand and urinate on the street and nobody can say anything because everybody thinks alali buro.
I mean, earlier you talk about the reforms. I mean, in this case, you're talking about trying to hold some of these people accountable. No doubt the National Assembly has a huge role. I mean, that's part of their mandate, performing oversight functions. I mean, what would you like to see, or what approach would you like to see the new legislature take to ensure that these people are held accountable for their actions?
No,
especially when it comes to the reports of corruption.
No, that one is two things. Gambia needs to have, like, the Auditor General's office needs to be doing annual audits, and these audits must be made public. You understand?
They did one recently, Mr.
No, but some of those things, were they made public by the National Audit Office? I think it came through a whistleblower, and we've seen what come out of it. Because at the end of the day, instead of us Gambians taking it and discussing on the merits and the demerits of the report and looking at how to hold those people who are mentioning it accountable, it became a political jig-jag. You understand? Initially, everybody said it was corruption, but when the names of the people who benefited from that money was published, they said it's Padian. You understand? So they are entitled to it. So for me, most of the time in our discussions and in our dialogues, we tend to focus more on the political aspect than the realities. So for me, Barrow has a responsibility, because the fact is, he needs to understand one thing. He needs to understand that very clearly. When God is holding him accountable for how he governed Gambia, all these people that are cheering him, nobody will be there. So whether he likes it or not, I pray that he lives long, but a day will come, God will hold him accountable for how he was governing Gambia. So when it comes to corruption, what belongs to the people belongs to the people. If anybody misappropriates it, it doesn't matter whether it's my father or it's my uncle or it's my chief supporter, he needs to be prosecuted. And not only prosecuted, but also we need to start seizing the assets of these corrupt public officials and sell it. Because government, how many ministers are government paying rent for? How many government offices are paying rent? There are many. But you can see even the land that belongs to the public, they are giving it to other people for free, while government is renting. So you give land to people, they build apartments or they build offices, and they come back and rent it to government. So before government thinks of renting people these properties, why not they build even an estate where ministers will stay, and you know that it doesn't belong to you. If you are Minister of Education, you go straight to this estate. Room number 1 belongs to the Minister of Education. The permanent secretary is there, the line department directors are there. Once you are no more there, you vacate and the new person comes in. It's better than government. How many millions?
Allocating.
Yeah, it's government. Government is renting. They are renting. Most of these ministers, government is renting apartments for them. So it's expensive. So for me, in fighting corruption, the president should be number one. The political will, if it is not there, no matter what Parliament does, no matter what the Auditor General does, will not have any effect. Because what the Auditor General can do is to audit these institutions, come up with a report and recommendation and forward it to the executive. So now
about political will, Mr. Mbod, do you see any political will to fight corruption?
I'm wondering here, you've talked about land being allocated to ministers and all the rest of it. Is it that you're saying that they didn't follow due process, or that shouldn't be done at all?
No.
What are you saying?
No, I'm not saying that. I know they follow due process, because in the land, in the laws of the country, it's there. This is not the first allocation that has happened. It has been happening since Jawara's time. You go to all these places, most of these estates around Cardiff, in Bakote, you go to Pipeline, Fajara, Cape Point, most of those houses, I'm not going to say all, were allocated. So it's something that is within our laws. But what we need to look at is, my belief is, every Gambian has right to a decent living. So if government cannot allocate land to every Gambian, to every citizen, they should not allocate land to anybody, whether it's the president or minister or whoever. Because when it comes to paying tax, all of us pay tax. When they take loans, that burden of loan goes to every Gambian. So if you cannot give every Gambian...
But how realistic is that? I wonder, this demand, if you like, you're making on the government, can you point to any country in the world where actually everybody has been allocated land?
Libya, during Gaddafi's time. It's simple. What they need to do is, government needs to create social housing, affordable housing, and they need to build estate. And for me, that is the essence of, that should be the essence of and the core mandate of social security.
That's it, but providing social housing, this is normal. Governments do it all over the world, as it were, don't they? And so that to make it cheap, affordable, that's the key. They do it all over the world. So yes, of course they can. But again, of course, that will be complemented by what the private sector is doing. As always, is the key. You can never have the government providing all the answers when it comes to housing. Surely you would agree with that.
Yeah,
which means that the government cannot do it 100%. Is it realistic to demand that of government? I'm not sure about that.
But in this case, he talks about is having a housing estate, sort of. I mean, do you agree that that's something that the government should look into?
No, but
and
this
also
is what
he talks about the issue of the political will to fight corruption.
But this is what he's saying. I mean, these allocations have been happening for a long time, since Jawara's time. Yes, when it comes to the fighting corruption, but of course, when you look at, there are many reports, a good number of reports, saying that the Gambia appeared not to have really been driven, not to have made much inroads into fighting corruption and the like. That's absolutely true. But what have we seen recently? I mean, early on, you talked about the National Assembly and what they were doing. But we must be fair to some extent that we've seen how the public authorities, how it was really the National Assembly that exposed, the malpractices and all of that. You were following, the proceedings as well. And there was also a task force which was formed, headed by the Minister of Trade. Now the Minister of Finance, and then from there are prosecutions. So of course it is accepted, but again we look at the other side. These are the efforts. You have to double the efforts. It's really the situation that sort of one is doing nothing, if you know what I mean. Perhaps what I'm doing is ineffective, it's ineffectual. You have these ineffectual people in places trying to implement things which are not thought through. You have to think things through. But again, let's try to have a balance and see how we can have a constructive, more enabling, more engaging, as it were, relationship between civil society, us, and government. I will opt for that sort of thing and see how we can encourage them to fight these things, really.
Thank you very much, Modou Mbodj and Daba Malik. Well, viewers, you reminded that you're watching State of Affairs, your flagship political program here on QTV. I'm your host, Aliou Cissé. We'll go for a short break and we'll be back soon.
Looking for the fastest and easiest way to receive money transfers from abroad? Well, QMoney and Ria just made it happen. Now you can receive international money transfer from Ria directly into your QMoney account with no additional cost. Once you receive an SMS alert about your transfer, walk into any QMoney agent across the country to receive your payment for free, or use the money immediately to buy credit, QPower, and other QMoney services. It's fast, safe, and convenient. For more info, call customer care on 133. QMoney, Sunu Kalpe. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back, viewers from that short break. You're still watching QTV, the Gambia's first private TV station, and we are broadcasting from our studios here on Kairaba Avenue. My name is Aliou Cissé, and today we have Daba Malik, a social commentator, a concerned citizen, and of course my co-host and contributor, Mr. Modou Mbodj, are with me in the studio. I mean, Daba, I mean, like I said, I mean, after what has been 5 months since the president was elected in December, I mean, he has finally reshuffled his cabinet and appointed a new one. Take us through. What's your take on the new cabinet?
To be fair and honest to Barrow, but also to the new appointees, I think by and large, it's a good setup of people. You know, sometimes I know people can play politics, but Barrow himself is a politician, and I've seen people have had some queries with regards to why keeping Ahmad Ba and Musa Drame and bringing in Demba Sabali, you know. And I always say this, Barrow is a politician, and for his political career and his political future, he needs to have politicians in cabinet, even though cabinet positions are political appointments, and that's what Gambians needs to understand first. You know, they have responsibilities, but you cannot divide politics also from what they do, because government has a policy, and whatever government does, it's politics. You understand? All these roads that they are building, the changing of lives of people, is because they want to convince people that we are a better alternative to whatever you see. So that in subsequent elections, people can always vote for them. So, and with regards to him having the vice president that he chose, I think he made
Badra Ali Joof.
Yeah, Badra Ali Joof. I don't know him personally, but I've spoken to people who know him, and looking at his demeanor, because for me that is what is more important, and looking at also his CV, he has experience. So what is remaining is that one for him to do, and that is to understand that he occupies the position not because he is the best among Gambians, but God has designated that it was going to be him. So in whatever that he does, whatever advice that he gives to the president, he needs to be honest with him. He needs to tell him the truth, respectfully, but also stand his ground to make sure that he understands that whatever they accomplish as a group, the good thing goes to, it's about their legacy. Whatever bad, also they will always remember him for that. So by and large, I think what Gambians needs to do is to give them both the moral and spiritual support that they need and pray that they succeed, but also hold them accountable in areas where they go offline so that we can bring them on track. And if by any chance, I don't pray that to happen, but if anybody also is not delivering the reason why the president appoints him there, I don't think he should hesitate to change the person and bring in another person. But I think by and large, if they put Gambia first, I think they can deliver. And I think most of them are non-political. I don't think they are more of they are political savvy. And so when he appoints less politicians and more of technocrats, I think if he listens to them and they are honest within themselves, I think they should be able to come up with policies that will at least better the lives of Gambians. I cannot say change the lives of Gambians because it's going to take time, but at least it will better the lives of Gambians. So by and large,
were you surprised when you saw the list?
No, not really. I did not know the names of the people, but I know there was going to be changes, and for two reasons. One, the TRRC report has, let me not say indict, but let me say has made some recommendations about certain people who are serving in cabinet. That's one. And I don't think the TRRC is a report that the executive is going to play politics on. Then they should not do it, because it's very sensitive, and the way we'll handle it will go to a greater extent how we reconcile as a people and as a country. And for me, I think reconciliation within Gambians is very much important, because that is what is going to push the country to the next level that we want to. And I think Rwanda has done it, Sierra Leone have done it, Liberia have done it, South Africa have done it, and we can learn from those people. So I know that one has played a role in it. Second one was, I think, the public perception about certain ministers, especially Mamoudou Njie, who was the finance minister. A lot of people, to a great extent, were throwing this notion, even though they have never come out with any evidence to prove what they were saying.
Exactly.
But the constant noise of Mamoudou is corrupt, Mamoudou is corrupt, Mamoudou is corrupt has gone to the point a lot of Gambians have got that perception about him. You understand? So that's why for me, perception is very much important. And I think Mamoudou also has not done well by coming out to explain clearly some of these things for the layman to understand. You understand? Because when you keep silence about certain things that are said in public and which are not true, it means sometimes it can still create that doubt. So for me, I was never surprised that to a greater extent he has made changes.
I mean, you talk to some people, they were like, okay, they were expecting to have some of these key political parties, leaders, those who backed the NPP in the last election to be in the cabinet. Where does this leave that marriage now between NPP and these partners?
But look, Ali, you see, sometimes for me, what I always say, you know, you don't have to be a coalition. For me, what my understanding about forming a coalition is because we have the same agenda, we have common, unless what in a very rare situations like what happened in 2016. Because most of the time, coalition governments are formed between political parties that have the same vision.
Okay.
You understand? Like the left will go with the left, the far rights will go with the far right, the Republicans will go with the Republicans, the Democrats or the Socialists will go with the Socialists. But like, for example, what happened in 2016, it was a very unique situation where you have Democrats, Social Democrats, you have democratic people who believe in the democratic principles. They all come together because they have one objective, and that was to uproot Jammeh. But in this situation, for me, I don't think people should join coalition government because they want to hold ministerial position. Or Barrow should appoint people in position of ministries because they supported him. Because how many million Gambians voted for Barrow? Over 800, I don't know, 500,000 plus. Yeah. So can he appoint all those people? No. Sometimes for me, what the president needs to understand, not only Barrow, but anybody who is given responsibility to govern this country is to understand is your core mandate is to deliver service. Like there's a contract. There is a social contract between you and the people. So for me, whoever you think, whether he's in the opposition, whether he does not support you, whether he hates you, and you believe that the person can deliver that and can be loyal, because loyalty also is key. You understand? Because when you are in public offices, you get access to a lot of information. Not because you are the best Gambian or you are the most trustworthy Gambian, but it's because of the position that you occupy. So the person must be loyal and must be able to, and that's why when public officers are appointed, they swear to oath of office and all this stuff, because you should be able to keep these things. But by and large, I don't think coalition members went in there because they wanted to have ministerial posts. I think these were just accusations or suggestions that were thrown out there on social media, because if it was, since the appointment of the new ministers, I've never had any coalition member come out to show their frustration or anger or disapproval of the current setup. So unless and until that is done, or we have access to the coalition agreement that they signed, I don't like second guessing or, relying on speculation to say this is the fact. So,
yes, I mean, let me not bring in Mr. Mboch here. I mean, you've heard from Daba talks about the issue of taking oaths. I mean, we know the new cabinet has been sworn in. They took the prescribed oaths of office, allegiance, and secrecy. I mean, is this something that people really take serious? These oaths?
Oh, that. I didn't know. I mean, if we did, can you imagine?
Is it just a formality that people just go through and that's it?
But can you imagine around the world, with most of these offices, you have to take an oath. How many people have taken the oath and went on to do some terrible, awful things? Yeah. So it just depends. It just depends on the character of the person. Yes, Dabak, you mentioned something very important. Somehow we tend to focus on education, experience, good. But there's a third element, character. I can be a genius cognitively, and experience have gone everywhere. But still, I could basically be dishonest. Yeah. One doesn't necessarily lead to another. There's a myth that, the more educated you are, then you become more moralized. Well, experience, I think, has sort of exploded that idea. I'm not sure about that. So with the cabinet, there are two aspects here. Personnel, yes, the movement, and the restructuring. It's quite interesting here. With the personnel, yes, a lot of people were wrong-footed, the grapevine, because we were reading about, Barrow will do this or Barrow will do that, and suddenly it came with this team, as it were, that not many people could predict who could come in. Badara Aliu Diouf, well, I've known him since I was young. He's been around for a very long time. I remember at high school, St. Augustine's High School, he came over, gave a speech, and we were all excited by it. So the idea is the experience and, varied, so many different fields, and the maturity In fact, when I was listening to the speech that he gave at the swearing-in ceremony, there was that sort of authoritative poise, that calm, that control, sort of reassuring in many ways and short to the point. So you get the impression that there's a mature person there taking care of things. So that's all very interesting. And others, we've seen new faces, younger faces with the Abdoulaye Job. A lot of people have also expressed sort of like positive, as they were, responses, reactions to that one. That was the young Rohi John Manjang. So that's it. So this is it. They've taken their oaths. So now it's time to work. But this really connects to our earlier topic, the legislature. Yeah. Because these people, this is where we have to hold these people to account. So you asked a question earlier about the distribution, the power distribution in the National Assembly. So this is it. 18 NPP, 15 UDP, 12 independents, 4 NRP, 2 APRC, and all of these things.
And 5 nominated.
That's it.
And 5 nominated.
That's it. So NPP doesn't have an outright majority. It's 18. I'll be told that the 5 nominated will automatically be part of them. I'm not sure about the automaticity. In politics, you don't have permanent friends. So those people might decide to use their discretion, their own consciences, when it comes to certain legislation. So you must not really rely on that. You know what I mean? And second, with the NRP, yes, you have a coalition, but again, they understand that has given them some kind of weight. You know, when you want to pass certain legislation, you may need to have others, you know, your coalition members, so that you can pass certain laws. So suddenly that has given them some kind of power. And you can never rely on that. What happened with the last coalition should be a lesson. There are no permanent friends, only permanent interests. So that's it. So how would it play out? How would the legislature, how would they carry out, as it were, their oversight functions? As you said, it's really highly crucial. It will help everybody. So the connection between the cabinet and then how the National Assembly will hold them to account will be very, 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 very interesting. Because I think that the National Assembly, the way power is distributed, it could be very, very interesting. There are 12 independents. A lot of people are sort of cynical, saying that, oh, you'll probably have most of them will go over to NPP about power. I said, maybe, maybe not. So I don't want to preempt anything. I don't want to forejudge anything. But I know that NPP on its own, it's merely 18. So others have certain power, really, whether they realize it or not, that we can use for the benefit of this country. Where you're doing well, we will support you. Where you're not, when legislation is dodgy, we should really think about the Gambia first. And then maybe the party. Sometimes you do see, for instance, we see it in Britain all the time. Sometimes the Conservative members of of Parliament will come and say, well, Prime Minister, I'm not sure about that. Now, that will be mature. That could be interesting. I think everything is well poised in the National Assembly for that.
Yes, and Daba, coming back to you, looking at the composition of the current, of the new cabinet, we have seen a new ministry is introduced, ministry responsible for public service reforms, and we have also seen what used to be the Ministry of Information and Communication is now separated. We have the Minister of Information under Lamin Kounjame, who is new minister, and Minister of Communication. There is no minister appointed yet for that ministry. What's your take on this, having these ministry split?
Yeah, because it depends on what kind of reforms and what kind of agenda that the government has. Because, based on what development agenda or policies they have will determine the kind of ministries that they need and the number of ministries. So maybe also because of the excessive workload that were centered in one ministry, and it was creating bottlenecks for some of it. It was making the process maybe slow, and to fasten it probably could be the reason why they decided to break it into 2, because communication should focus more on the communication aspect and selling, the picture of government, doing all sort of things like that. But when you go to the Ministry of maybe Information and Technology, maybe they tend to focus more working with the Ministry of Higher Education to develop policies and try to come up with, because currently right now in the world, if you want to develop as a country or you want to grow as a business, you must invest on technology and research. You understand? So maybe based on what they want to do, that's the reason why they are doing it. But I see also a lot of people have issues with some of the people that are picking for those positions. But like I said, for me, I think that's my belief. Apart from the Ministry of Justice, the Solicitor General and Minister of Justice, who should be a legal-minded person because he is the chief legal advisor to government, and he is the Solicitor General also, I think. Anybody can handle a ministry. If even somebody who studied medicine can be a minister for agriculture or minister for education.
Like in this case, we've seen Damba Sabali. Many people are saying, he studied nursing, so why is he giving?
No, for me, I don't think that's.
So some people are like this more of a political appointment now.
No.
I mean, but even though you said, all cabinet appointments are political appointments.
Who is a Gambian who is not a son of a farmer? There was somebody not gone to the farms and farm, and he understands what farmers go through, because he's a child of a farmer who grew up in the farming communities and has probably gone to the farms over and over and over. But what is more important is, for me, is the technical aspect of the ministry, and that is the permanent secretary and the directors who are heading the different institutions at the Ministry of Agriculture, because those should be the technical people. Because the minister, the way he advises government, the president, that's the same way his directors and the permanent secretaries should be able to advise him. And I think most of those people are technocrats in those fields. But also they've been there probably over 20 years or 30 years careers were based in that ministry. So they understand the ministry. So for me, what is important is, it doesn't matter who you are. Once you are appointed a minister or you are appointed to a place for the first time, you have to learn. And you can only learn if you open yourself and you bring down yourself to the level of those people that you work with, and open yourself so that they can teach you some of the things, the do's and don'ts of the ministry, and for you to understand. And you understand also that you as an individual alone cannot direct and take that department forward. So you have to be open, and you need to have attentive ears to listen when people make proposals, but don't be a semi-mini dictator because I'm the minister, my word stands. Throw it out there and then let them, they also need to be honest and frank and be open to you and understand that positions are ordained by God. You understand? Because if it is qualification, probably Barrow would not sit there, because there are more qualified Gambians than him. And that's the fact. If it is qualification, a lot of these ministers or people occupying public offices will not be there, because there are more qualified Gambians than them. But once you understand that this person is there and it's my responsibility, like he said, people swear to oath. You see, Gambia, it's a religious country, whether you are Christian or Muslim. Yes, we have some atheists, we have some people who don't believe in anything, but to a greater extent, maybe 98%, we are religious people. So for me, as a religious person, what we believe is whatever you do on earth, you will be held accountable for it in the life after. So that including your job, where you work at. You understand? So everybody, once they feel that way, I think they should be able to work as a team. So for me, I think whether it's a political appointment or not, the end justifies the means. So when he proves, his work should be based on what we should judge him for, but not what people say about him when he is even yet to start.
Yes, Mr. Mbosh, I mean, in the new cabinet, we've seen there's some sort of restructuring. We've seen now Chief of Staff for the first time. We have investing. Where do you think the president might have gotten the idea from? Chief of Staff.
Well, some people blame
Nigeria.
Some people blame the Americans as a concept. Chief of Staff.
And just take us through what the rules of a Chief of Staff. I mean,
this is it. But this is really what the problem is. One wonders whether the rules have been defined already. Do we know? I mean, it's quite interesting.
According to the announcement, he's going to handle all the correspondences.
Yeah. So this is it. This is.
I'm not sure whether it's limited to only that. Maybe there are other responsibilities as well.
That's it. But that does it. What does that mean? I mean, that will give this Chief of Staff an extremely powerful position. Everything through the president is from this one. This is it. So there was an interesting piece in the papers written by Abdusara Jangha, former Secretary General of this country. In fact, in 1994, when the coup d'etat happened, he was the last Secretary General. And he's pointed this, which is quite curious, saying that now, for the first time, really, the Secretary General and Minister and head of the civil service is no longer directly under the President. Now it's under a minister. Yes? And then when you have, there's also a cabinet secretary. Now you've got the chief of staff. We hope that you're not going to create a situation where they will be competing for control of the turf. What are the rules? Have they been well defined?
Well, we see that scenario at some point in the government. I mean, when you had people doing the similar job and there was that push and pull, here and there, we have the scenario, and like you said, we hope that won't happen in this case. I doubt it will happen.
Apparently, with this idea of creating a chief of staff, it was first suggested in the draft constitution that has been discarded. You see, you can have a chief of staff, as they say. I mean, in the US, there is a chief of staff, but that is just for the private office of the president. In Britain, they also have a chief of staff in the private office of the PM. Obviously, the president needs support, but that one is more private, not mainstream. You always want your Secretary General and Head of Civil Service to really be in charge, should be working with the president very, very closely. So this would be interesting now. For the first time, the Secretary General and Head of Civil Service will have to go and report to a minister.
Interesting.
Now we have a Minister of Public Service. So we will see how it pans out, whether they have clearly defined the roles of each and every one of them. Then one will step on the toes of others so that you can have a smooth running of the government. That is so very sensitive, very, very close to the president.
Very close. Chief of Staff, Motkesi is the former permanent secretary at the Ministry of Works. Secretary General Salimata E. Toure. These are all people who have vast experience and they have served in the government. Daba, let me just bring you in here. We're talking about the cabinet, diversity, gender representation. Only 3 women. Why you expect to have more women in cabinet?
No. 3 is better than none. No, for me, I don't look at it. No, that's just a joke. But on a more serious note, on a more serious note, for me personally, I don't believe in people should be appointed based on their gender, religion, color, or whatever. What I look for is the person who can deliver what needs to be delivered at that particular point in time and is appointed. So if the whole cabinet were going to be women because they are the people, the crop of people that we see at that point who can deliver what we need, so be it. If they are all men, so be it. You know, we don't have to believe in that notion of like, I've seen even a lot of people were suggesting the next vice president is going to be a woman because what they failed to understand during Jawara's days, I don't think even we have ever had a woman vice president. You understand? It's Jammeh who started appointing women as vice president, but it's not by law that we should put women there as vice presidents. Women can be presidents too. Why are women not aspiring to be presidents so that they can appoint men? So why do they want men to appoint them? So for me, what I've seen in this cabinet is diversity. Like I've seen people from different regions of this country. I've seen people from different religions of this country. I've seen people from different tribes. But most importantly, I've seen Gambians. Because for me, that is the most important thing. Because they are there not because of their tribe, not because of their religion, not because of their color or their creed or their beliefs or whatever. They are there because they are Gambians. And the president believes these are a crop of people that he believes they can deliver what he promises to Gambians. And I hope and pray that they can. Because if they cannot, it's the president that who is going to be held accountable for that, and it will cost him in the polls.
Thank you very much, Daba Malik, social commentator, and of course, concerned citizen. If you've been following social media, Facebook in particular, he's very active there. He writes sensible commentaries. And thank you very much, Mr. Mudumboch of QTV, of course, the host of the Popular Viewpoint. Well, viewers, with that, we bring an end to this episode of the State of Affairs. We congratulate all the appointed ministers, and we hope, they will live up to the expectation for the reason why they are appointed. And like I said, Gambians will be watching closely as to what sort of changes you will bring to different ministries. On behalf of the production team, thank you so much, and I will see you again. Bye-bye.